Well, all the talk to start the week, or a lot of the talk to start the week, is surrounding the economy. We had a jobs report that came in underwhelming last week. And then, of course, the revision down 258,000 jobs for the two prior months as well is spooking people a bit. Steve Moore is here. He's a former economic advisor to the president. You see him on Fox News all the time. He's also a co-founder of Unleash Prosperity. And don't forget about his book that came out last year, The Trump Economic Miracle, and the plan to unleash prosperity again. So, Steve, are you a panicking this morning, or are you saying to yourself, no, I'm not going to buy into some of the fear out there? Where are you at on this thing today?
Well, good morning, Pete. It was a crazy week last week with respect to all the economic news that came out. I think it was Wednesday we come out with this blockbuster GDP report, which was very positive, showing the economy growing. It wasn't quite as positive as the headline number, but it was a good, solid number, 3%, something Biden wasn't able to accomplish in 4 years. And then, but then the next day, I was on Fox when the jobs report came out, and that was extremely disappointing. It showed only something like 50 to 60,000 jobs created, but it had a gigantic downward revision of about 250 or 260,000 jobs from the previous month. So I don't know. I'm trying to parse this all together. I do think that the economy is strong, and I think the stock market is good. We're at or near all-time highs, and we passed the big, beautiful bill, and that's just kicking in now. So I guess overall the news last week was a little disappointing, but I think we're on a good path.
How much over the weekend there was a lot of time spent, it seemed like, from many in media on blaming tariffs for some of where we're at right now. Now, the president's bragging about these tariffs, but, I think it remains to be seen what they mean for the economy long term. Where are you at on this?
So I do think tariffs plays a big part in what's happened with the economy in the first 6 months. And as you know, I'm not a big tariff guy. So the story is I'll try to simplify it. Every time Trump talks about tariffs, the market goes down. Mm-hmm. Every time he comes up with a good trade deal like he has with the Europeans and other countries, the market goes up. And so as I look at these numbers in the first half of the year on the jobs, I don't think there's any question that the job market took a hit with the tariffs, because I talked to manufacturers throughout the country. We have a lot of the people who are members of my group run, medium-sized manufacturing companies, and they were telling me back in, April and May that they had to lay off workers, that they were that they had huge supply chain problems. They couldn't get the parts in, they couldn't get, the inputs in that they needed, whether it was the steel or the copper or what it might be, and so their assembly lines slowed down. Now that was 3 or 4 months ago. The good news is, Pete, that now that you've got many of these trade deals done, we're kind of getting back to normal, and that should help employment. So I do think the tariffs, all the uncertainty about where tariffs were headed, did have a negative effect.
So now, the other punching bag for the president lately has been Jerome Powell and the Fed chair.
Uh-huh. By the way, I thought you were going to say the Bureau of Labor Statistics.
Well, yeah, you're right.
We fired, but yes, of course, Jerome Powell's a punching bag too.
It's hard to keep track of all the punching bags, obviously. So, when you're looking at this thing, Steve Moore, first, are you interested in running the BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, or are you a hard pass on that?
Well, just for people who aren't following this, on Friday afternoon, Trump fired the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics because he didn't like the jobs numbers, and I thought that was a mistake, frankly, because it looked like he was he was firing the referee for delivering some bad news. Although I also believe that the BLS has been completely incompetent. Those jobs numbers that come out. We have an item in our hotline today about this, by the way. Everybody should get that hotline. Just go to unleashprosperity.com and sign up. That's free. But over the last few years, the BLS comes out with these numbers, and these are important numbers because the economy, people make all sorts of investment decisions and all sorts of business decisions based on those numbers that come out on jobs, and we pay a lot of attention to them, and they've been completely wrong for the last few years. In fact, they keep under Biden, they overestimated the number of jobs that were created by somewhere between 1.5 million and 2 million jobs. That's a big miss.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost like you got a blind person throwing at the dartboard there. That's what happened there. But with respect to Jerome Powell, I think the guy has been both incompetent, and I think he's been very political. And the irony about Jerome Powell is that he's the one who's saying, we have to make sure the Fed maintains its political independence, but he's been incredibly political. I mean, he cut interest rates. Remember, about 6 weeks before the election in 2024, when Kamala was running, he did rate cuts. Just pump more money in the economy. Gee, do you think he might have been putting his thumb on the scale in the election? And then, one reason I think he might have been is that now the inflation is lower than it was back then, but he won't lower rates. So I think Powell has to go. His term is up in May. There's a lot of talk about maybe Trump firing him before that. There is an open question whether Trump actually has that authority to do it. I say the president should have the authority to fire the Fed chairman because, after all, if the Fed chairman can't, if the president can't fire Jerome Powell, then who can? And he's one of the most powerful people in Washington.
Yeah.
So anyway, I don't think he's going to fire him. I think he's going to name someone soon who will be kind of a successor. And I think Trump, that'll put a lot of pressure on Powell to resign.
Is it fair to say, though, that as much as Powell missed it and was late on inflation and may have looked political last year, lowering rates at this point is not going to magically solve the economic issues that exist out there, especially when you're talking about a quarter, maybe half a point? I mean, I'm not saying it's not valuable, Steve, but it's, in the grand scheme of things, fairly inconsequential. Do you agree with that?
I think that I do agree with the premise of your question, which is that I think people on Wall Street and a lot of economists put way too much weight on the Fed's ability to sort of quote micromanage the economy.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. All my friends say the Fed should be cutting rates. They got to cut rates. This is going to stimulate the economy. Well, when the Fed, just so people understand, because this gets a little confusing, when the Fed lowers interest rates, that's a way of pumping more money into the economy, right? Mm-hmm. And so, here's the problem: when you put more money into the economy, it's like a sugar high, right? Because you get that initial boost of money in the economy, but over a longer term, that can cause higher inflation, right? Or at least the expectations of higher inflation. So back in when I mentioned back in September and October, when the Fed lowered, by the way, the Fed only has control over what's called the federal funds rate, which is like a 30-day interest rate. Nobody borrows other than the Federal Reserve and banks at that rate. So the federal funds rate was cut, right? Mm-hmm. And then the markets thought, oh my gosh, they're going to pour more money in the economy. That could mean more inflation. What do you think happened to the 30-year mortgage rate after the Fed cut the short-term rates?
Went up.
They went up. Exactly the opposite of what we would want to see. So my point is, look, I think they should probably do a quarter point. I think it might help a little bit at the margins. But Trump wants a 200 reduction in the rates. That would pump huge amounts of money into the economy, and I think that would cause prices to rise, and I think it would cause the long-term 30-year mortgage rate to go up, not down. In other words, it would have exactly the opposite effect that Trump wants, and that would I'm not necessarily in favor of that, but I think the other thing, of course, is that the Fed has I don't know if you're following this story, but they've spent $3 billion on their renovation of their what I call the Taj Mahal on Pennsylvania Avenue. It's outrageous. It really is. I mean, we have so much empty office space in Washington right now, and the idea that they would spend and he was in charge of that. And look, there's an old saying, charity begins at home. If you can't even control your own expense, they're supposed to be watching the money, and that's the way he spent it. And by the way, you saw Trump come in when they asked him, "What do you think about the 3.1 billion? Billion dollars?" He said, "Oh, I could have done that renovation for about $3 billion less."
Oh gosh, Steve, it's an interesting time right now. It's going to be a fascinating week ahead. We appreciate you being here.
But let me just conclude with one thing, though.
Yeah.
I'm really bullish on the U.S. economy right now. I mean, the market took a big hit late last week when the market jobs came out. But look, we got the jobs bill done. We're getting a bunch of good trade deals done. I think. I think this economy's really prepared to take off. So I don't think people should all panic.
From your lips there, Steve Moore. Thank you, my friend.
There you go.
Great stuff.
Talk to you next week.
Talk to you soon. Bye. Steve Moore, former economist for the President of the United States and the founder of Unleash Prosperity.